All right. Hello again, everybody. Hello. Welcome back to the Conscious Love Show podcast. Shane Kohler on with you. Pleasure as always. Happy to be back. Looking forward to diving in today. I'm recording today's episode a few days early because I will be out of town next week on the day that I normally record. So today's going to be a little bit informal, more like me and you just sitting in the living room having a chat. But I wanted to show up and put something together for this week. And I want to talk about a conversation that came up with one of the ladies in my Inspired Love group yesterday. And by the way, Inspired Love is my personal coaching program. It's the place where we can work together directly. And what I'm going to share today is an example of the kind of conversation we might have in there. But what came up with this wonderful woman yesterday is something that I think is so profound. It's so relatable. It's something I know I've experienced. I think we all experience it at times. And it's the way that our insecurity shapes our relationship, especially when we meet someone who we feel is high value. And the way that when we meet someone who's high value, or at least we perceive as high value, we tend to automatically lower our value in their presence. And this is, the way this insecurity shows up is so familiar to us. It becomes so normalized. It becomes something that we often don't even question because it feels so normal and so familiar to us. And yet, when we allow it to run uninterrupted, it literally sabotages every opportunity for connection with the kind of people that we actually want to be connected to. This doesn't show up with people that we're unsure about or people that we just kind of like. But when we meet someone that we really respect, when we meet someone that we're like, this is the kind of person that I really want to be with, that's when this surfaces. And again, we tend to accept it as normal. It's deeply familiar to our nervous system. And so we don't even question it. And it's often the very reason why the people that we respect the most don't perceive our value and why we end up sabotaging connections with the people that we actually want to be with. So this is a potent conversation. This woman who brought it up yesterday, I really appreciate her authenticity and her vulnerability in naming this. And I want to talk about what I explored in the conversation with her, and really just how this shows up for us in general and what we do to work with this. And so let me just paint the picture for a moment. And this wonderful woman who's in my program meets an amazing man. It sounds like a great guy in a lot of ways. He's successful and established and he's got his shit together and he's the kind of man that she's looking for, right? And as I said, this doesn't really happen with the people that we're unsure about. It happens with the people that we respect. And so what happened for her is, she's been talking to this guy for a little while, been out on a few dates with him, and suddenly starts to feel very insecure in relationship. She starts to feel small. She starts to fear that she is not enough for him. She starts to analyze certain areas of her life and compare those areas of her life in contrast to his and say, maybe I'm not good enough for someone like him. Maybe he's looking for someone who's more than me. And then the anxiety starts to creep in. And what if I lose him? Or what if I don't keep him? And even underneath that, because I want to say this early on in the episode, and we're going to explore this in some detail, but it's not even necessarily about what if I lose him or what if I can't keep him. That's sometimes how it shows up on the surface. But what's really going on underneath is that if he doesn't choose me, I'm not going to like the way I feel about myself. Right? If he doesn't choose me, it's going to validate all of my deepest fears about myself. It's going to affirm that the things that I fear are not okay about me are truly not okay. And let's start there, because that's that's the biggest issue that I want to address in today's episode is when we meet someone that we respect, someone that we admire, someone we look up to, someone that we like, someone we say, this is the kind of partner that I truly want to be with. We often feel small in comparison to that person. And then that actually puts that person in a really difficult position because they no longer have the freedom to relate to us as an equal partner. They start having to carry the responsibility of our own self-image. They start having to carry the responsibility of making us feel worthy. And when we put that pressure on someone, especially early on, it's almost certain to sabotage the relationship. And I've often touched on this. I've said, when we put someone in that position, especially early on, that person has one of two choices. They either feel the pressure of that and it feels heavy and they don't want to carry that, and so they withdraw from the relationship, or they manipulate it and they abuse it, which is what, if you happen to feel this way in relationship with a more toxic person, they'll often use that as leverage to wield power over you, and that becomes abusive very fast. In either case, it's not a good situation. Worst case scenario, you set yourself up to be manipulated and abused. Best case scenario, you push the person away because it feels heavy and they're like, I'm not looking for something this heavy. And so, obviously, and I'm stating the obvious here, but this never works, right? In order to forge a quality connection, especially with someone that we perceive as high value, and on some level they probably perceive themselves as high value, although they certainly have their own fears and insecurities too. But in order to forge a connection with them, they need to experience the relationship as though we are meeting as equals. And you need to experience it that way too, right? Like, both people need to experience this not as, oh, one person is up on a pedestal and I need to perform for their acceptance or their approval or to get them to like me. But no, we're two equals meeting and determining the quality of the connection here. So the question becomes, when you meet someone that you respect, that you admire, someone you look up to, someone you think, this is the kind of person I really want to be with. And when you're in the presence of someone like that, often a normal human response is to feel small. And then you start to say, okay, I feel small, but if they would choose me, I wouldn't feel so small. And the question becomes, how do we balance that equation? Rather than performing for their choice or performing for their acceptance, how do I balance the equation so that we start meeting as equals here? And so, first thing I want to do is name the core flaw in perception. And the core flaw in the perception is that we immediately start focusing on what I need from them rather than what I have to offer them. And I want to say this for anyone who's experienced this, and like I said, I've experienced it before too. But I want to say this because we often don't think about it this way, is when you approach a relationship from that place, it's very selfish. And sometimes the thing that pushes that person away is that it feels selfish to them because the relationship becomes about validating yourself. And I know, and I want to say this up front, I know that you're not trying to be selfish. I know that nobody thinks they're being selfish, but this is the thing. Insecurity is inward focused. Insecurity is what's wrong with me? Why am I not good enough? And insecurity makes us selfish. And it's really interesting because when we feel small in comparison to someone, or when we feel like we need their acceptance or their approval, that borders on a victim mentality, and victims never think they're being selfish because victims always think that it is being done to them. It's life in the world being done to me. I'm not at fault here. And by the way, I'm not saying this is anybody's fault. But when we slip into a victim mentality, when we start feeling small, when we start feeling insignificant, when we start feeling like we're not good enough, in an interesting way, we subtly start to perpetrate something on the relationship. And we deprive that person of the experience of being met because we're not showing up connected to, what do I have to offer to this person? What do I have to contribute to this person? How can my experience in their life make their life better? How can my presence in their life make their experience better? We start focusing on what we need from them. And even though we don't feel like we're perpetrating something, we are. We're showing up as a taker. We're showing up to extract. And when I say this, I want to be clear. I'm not blaming, I'm not shaming, I'm not guilting. I'm illuminating the shadow side of insecurity. And it's important to see that insecurity does have a shadow side, because when we feel insecure, we're not connected to that. We don't think we're perpetrating anything. We don't think we're being a taker. We feel small, we feel insignificant, and we feel desperate to be chosen. But it's important to recognize that when we feel that way, it's not only harming ourselves, it's also depriving the other person of something. And it's depriving the connection of something that could actually give it vitality and aliveness. And so this is what we explored in the session yesterday. One of a few things, and I'm going to explore different facets of this. But one of the things we touched on was the moment you feel insecure in relationship to someone else, the moment you feel small in relationship to someone else, you got to catch yourself. You can't let that be normalized. You can't let that familiar feeling of insecurity start to shape how you show up in the relationship. Because you're going to stop bringing things to the relationship that actually demonstrate your value. And so this is what I asked this woman. I said, why is this man fortunate to have the opportunity to date you? Like, if this man partnered with you for life, what would he get that would make his life so much better? And that's important. Because when you start showing up in the relationship in that way, when you start showing up connected to, here's what I have to offer, if he partners with me, man, that dude just hit the jackpot. And then you start to present yourself and show up in the relationship in a way that lets him experience your value. In a way that actually lights him up. And it's important to say this because, you know, I work with a lot of women specifically, and we have these kinds of conversations. And it's not that men don't do it too, because men, like I said, I've experienced this, and I think men experience insecurity, but it shows up for women in a very specific flavor. Where a man's insecurity typically leads him to avoid, right? Like for a man, it shows up more like, I feel the pressure to perform. I feel the pressure to hold space. I feel the pressure to carry responsibility. I don't know if I'm ready or strong enough to carry all of that. And so I'm going to withdraw. That's how it happens often in the masculine frame. In the feminine frame, it shows up very different. It shows up, I need to be chosen because I'm not good enough, but if he chooses me, then I will be. And this is why I think, the masculine avoidance has its own pain, and it's the pain of isolation, the pain of loneliness. But it doesn't put men out on a limb the same way it puts women out on a limb. Like, she's really putting herself out there. Often opening herself up sexually. Often giving him more than he's earned. Often letting him hold her heart and her inner world and her body. And she really gives a lot of herself to him. And when she gives so much of herself and is still not chosen, that's brutal. It's brutal. And I think men instinctively protect themselves a little more than women do. And that's why this pain shows up for women, and it's so much more brutal than it is for men. So let's talk about what's operating here. And there's a word for it. It's something we work a lot with in my Inspired Love program. It's really the essence of all our relational wounds, and that word is shame. Shame is the underlying driving factor here. Probably the person who's done more work with shame than anyone else is Brené Brown. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you've probably read one or two of her books at least. Brilliant researcher, brilliant teacher, and she really has explored this topic in more detail than just about anyone else. And I love her definition for shame. She says, shame is the deeply painful experience of feeling that I am unworthy of love and belonging. And this is one of the most fundamental human emotions. I think it's built into the human experience in a lot of ways, and there's something fundamental about being a separate person in a body. When I look into other people's eyes and I don't know what they're thinking, and especially the way our world is set up, where from such a young age we're conditioned to perform for acceptance and approval, and we're constantly being measured. We're measured by our parents, we're measured by our teachers, we're measured by our grades, we're measured if we want to be on the sports team, or if we want to fit in with the certain crowd in of our peers. We're measured in our careers, like we're born into this world and we're isolated. So I'm in this body over here, and I look out at the world around me, and other people have opinions of me, and I don't know what their opinions are. I can only guess, and people aren't always honest about their opinions. And I'm raised in a system of reward and punishment, where when I perform to the expectations of others, starting with my parents, I'm rewarded for it. And when I don't perform to those expectations, I'm punished for it. And this is like a fundamental system that is built into the world. And so I'm isolated in my own body, in my own experience. And then I'm looking to others and on some level saying, who am I supposed to be in this life? Who am I supposed to be in this world? And everybody has their opinion. And I'm subjected to all of these opinions. And, my teachers have one idea, and my parents have another idea, and my coach has another idea, and my friends have another idea, and my crush has another idea. And all of this is happening from a very young age, and it only intensifies as we get older. And so the reason I'm stating all of this is because I want to map how we are born into a shame manufacturing system. The moment I am born into a separate body, a separate identity, disconnected from everyone and everything else, the possibility for shame is there. And the way our culture and our parenting structures and our schooling structures and our peer structures and the way all of this is shaped is a super potent environment for shame to just build at extremely destructive levels. And so by the time you reach adulthood, every single one of us is carrying an immense amount of shame. And on some level, every single one of us is questioning, am I good enough? And we're looking into the eyes of other people, again, in our careers, in our friendships, with our teachers, with our friends. We're looking into the eyes of other people and we're saying, am I good enough? And this is happening all the time in every area of our lives, but I've often talked about how our romantic relationships really shine a light on this in a more potent way than anything else. And the reason our romantic relationships really shine such a potent light on this is because they activate the same attachment system that I learned when I was a child with my parents, right? So like, in most of our lives, in most areas, in our careers, in our education, and in other areas of our lives, we go on and we figure out, who do I need to be in that world, and I adapt. And I'm able to build my identity in a way that for the most part protects me from shame. But all of that disappears in a romantic relationship. And when we meet someone, again, especially when it's someone we respect, when it's someone we admire, when it's someone we really want to be with, that same attachment system gets activated and we immediately go, am I good enough for you? And all of a sudden, we're 5 years old and we're looking into the eyes of our parents and we want to do anything to please them because pleasing them makes us feel safe. Pleasing them makes us feel worthy. And that is a devastating relational experience. And if we don't get a handle on it, it will sabotage every connection. So, Brene Brown, who I've learned so much about this topic from, has coined a phase, and she calls it shame resilience. And the thing is we're not going to get rid of shame. We're not going to get rid of it. It's built into the human experience. Every domain of our lives is a constant shame reinforcing system. We're not going to get rid of it. So it's one of those things we have to learn to live with rather than trying to get rid of. And, you know, so many of us, that's a mistake a lot of us make, is we sign up for a program or we sign up for, you know, something, therapy, whatever, and we think we're going to be able to outgrow this. And if it shows up year after year after year and we say, I've done all this work and I haven't outgrown it yet, well, part of the reason you're struggling is because your motivation was wrong. You were never supposed to try to outgrow it. You were supposed to learn how to live with it. And so this is shame resilience. And this is something that I actively work with all the ladies in my program on cultivating. How do you build shame resilience? So when it shows up in a relationship, it's something you recognize immediately, it's something you name, and it's something you know how to work with. It's not something you lose yourself to. It's not something you get hijacked by. So typically when shame surfaces, it almost happens unconsciously. And a lot of you will recognize this pattern where very rarely, you know, when you're dating someone and maybe, you know, you go on a date with them and it's a really good date and you're really attracted to them and you want the relationship to move forward, and then you're waiting for their text or call and you start getting anxious and are they going to want to see me again and blah, 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 all the ruminations that we go into. And very rarely do you say, oh, this is shame showing up right now. We never name that. And naming it is power. Once I name it, it's something I can work with. But we don't name it. We get overtaken by it. And then unconsciously, we start performing for that person's approval. Often without even realizing it. And this is where it gets really crazy, because sometimes we reach out and sometimes we don't. Sometimes we try to act like we're too cool for it, like I'm good, I don't need it. And other times we act desperate for it. And our behavior starts to become unpredictable. It starts to become erratic. It starts to become inconsistent. We start to say and do things that are a little embarrassing because we're trying to overcompensate for an emotion that we haven't even named. And no matter how good we try to hide it, it is experienced by the other person. And almost inevitably, it causes that other person to withdraw. You know, a lot of times it's interesting because a lot of times you'll get into a dynamic like this and the other person will withdraw and you'll think, I just wasn't good enough for them. And as I said earlier, it's like when that person withdraws, it's like confirmation of everything you feared about yourself. It's all true. I knew it. I'm just not good enough. I'm never going to be good enough. And what's funny is the truth is you were always good enough. You might have actually been exactly the kind of person that person was looking for. Only problem was your nervous system got hijacked. And so what that person experienced wasn't even you. And then they withdraw and you say, I knew it, I just wasn't good enough. It's like, no, you were good enough the whole time. They just never met you. They met your shame monster. Right? Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy to think about? People reject you and you think you're not good enough. No, you're actually everything they wanted. They just didn't get the chance to meet you. And so we've got to build shame resilience. We've got to learn how to name it, how to be with it, how to work through it. And when we start to build resilience around the shame, we don't bypass it. We don't repress it, because when you try to repress it, that's when it comes out sideways. But we integrate it. We feel it. We let it move through us. And in the face of all of that, we ask ourselves, who am I really? What do I really have to offer? And we lead with value. We show up in the relationship with our value. So shame becomes a passing experience that moves through us, not the defining experience that shapes how we participate in the relationship. And now I want to name, some of you have probably heard me speak about this before, but the process of reparenting or working with our inner child, which is I don't even love that language, honestly, because it sounds really fluffy and like almost woo-woo. Oh, I'm loving my inner child. And some people respond to that kind of thing. But what I want to name about this is it is a very legitimate psychological method. In fact, there's a whole school of therapy called IFS, Internal Family Systems. I'm sure I've spoken about it before. That is all about building relationships with our various inner children and the protective parts that guard those inner children. But I want to simplify it. And so while I don't love the language of, love your inner child, but what I do love is the power that this practice offers when you learn how to reparent yourself. Because basically what's happening is when you were young, and I said earlier, like the moment you look into the eyes of that person, you're suddenly 5 years old again, performing for the approval and the love and acceptance of your parents because you want to feel safe. And what happens is there is a part of you that never matured beyond 5 years old. There is a part of you that is still emotionally 5 years old. And that part is projecting your childhood relationship with your parents onto the significant relationships in your life. So your boss becomes another version of your father, the person you're dating becomes another version of your father, and so on. It's like this 5-year-old part is literally projecting that primal child-parent relationship onto the significant relationships of your life. And this is why learning how to nurture your inner child becomes so important. Not as a fluffy self-love practice, but as a literal psychological lever to empower yourself when shame wants to take over your life. Because you could think about it like this. And if you look into IFS therapy, you might work with dozens of parts, various inner children and various protector parts. But to simplify the conversation, I'm just going to name 2 parts. And so let's say you have the wounded inner child and you have the capable adult. And so there's a part of you that never grew beyond 5 years old. There's a part of you that is still an emotional child, projecting your childhood relationships onto the world and relating with the significant figures in your life as though they're your mother or your father. And feeling emotionally like a child in those relationships. And then what happens when, say, for example, the client I was working with, she meets a high-value man. He's established, successful, capable, attractive, intelligent, all the things that she wants in a partner. And she suddenly forgets that she's an adult. All of a sudden, she's 5 years old, and he's her father. And she's saying, what do I have to do to get him to be that safe emotional space for me? How do I have to perform for his approval just like I performed for the approval of my parents so that he will be that safe emotional space for me? And this is the thing. He doesn't want to be your parent. He wants to be your partner. And he wants you to meet him as a partner, which you can't do when you're operating like an emotional 5-year-old. And this is how relationships become so imbalanced, is because we unconsciously place someone in the parent role. And then we feel like the helpless child. So there's a practice called reparenting. And the philosophy basically goes like this. And in my program, this is something we actively work with to learn how to reparent ourselves in real time in these situations. But the philosophy goes something like this. So part of you is still emotionally 5 years old, and part of you has grown well beyond that. And you've gone and you've built a life and you've built a career and you own a home, or you pay your own rent, or you drive around in your own car and you do what you want, and you've become this capable, magnificent adult. And even though 90% of your life you show up as this capable, magnificent adult, there's this little fearful, insecure child still living inside of you, and every now and then that child just takes over. And for a period of time, you suddenly become that emotional child. Namely, when we're in an intimate relationship where our sexuality and our worthiness and our sense of self and our identity is on the line, the high intensity emotional situations tend to be when we revert to that child. And so in a high intensity emotional situation, I become that child. Now, the first important thing to do is to name this, similar to what I said earlier about naming the shame. I have to name, okay, this is my little wounded inner child, the one who never felt good enough, the one who felt like she never belonged, the one who never felt like she quite got the approval of her father or her mother, the one who was always trying to be the good girl or get it right or get the other kids at school to like her or get the approval of the teachers or get straight A's or whatever the metric was that she was trying to live up to. To be the best athlete, to be the best academic, to be the popular one, to be the attractive one, to be the chosen one. So the moment you name this, you're immediately stepping into adult you. Because who names it? It's not the child who names it. It's the adult who names it, right? So I see myself reverting to this 5-year-old emotional child. And I go, whoa, hold on. I see what's happening here. And I name it. The moment I name it, it's adult me naming it. So I am disidentifying with child me and re-identifying with adult me. Now, the thing is, there are certain emotional needs that that child needed to have met that they didn't. Where her parents told her, you have to be perfect, you have to be intelligent and thin and attractive and capable, and you have to be successful, and you have to follow the rules. And the parents had all these conditions for love. And even if our parents didn't try to do this, most of them did it anyway. Right? Where lovable isn't who you are. Lovable is a certain version of you that we want to curate. And often our parents did this because they loved us and because they wanted to protect us. And they said, there's a certain way you need to be okay in the world. And they unknowingly instilled a bunch of shame while they were trying to protect us. Such is life. And so that child had certain needs, and that child needed to be told that she was good enough just the way she was, that her emotions were valid, that she didn't need to curate a certain version of herself to be acceptable and approval in the world, and to be acceptable and approved of in the world. She needed to have it reinforced in her that who she was inherently was beautiful, was worthy, was lovable, and that it was okay for her to be herself just the way she was. That she had inherent gifts that lived inside of her that didn't require her contorting herself into a pretzel to fit into the expectations of others. And this started with parents, and as I've said, it goes on to teachers, and it goes on to peers and classmates, and it goes on to our crushes, and later our relationships, and our boyfriends and girlfriends, and so on. And the same pattern gets recreated in every significant relational experience of our lives. And that little girl needed her teachers to validate her, needed her peers to validate her, needed her friends to validate her, needed the popular kids at school to say, hey, you can come hang out with us. You can sit with us at the lunch table. Needed her crush to say, I like you. I think you're pretty. I think you're attractive. I want to date you. I want you to be my girlfriend, right? Like, she needed these things. And sometimes she got them, but most often she didn't. And so when you reparent yourself, what you are actually doing is speaking to that emotional 5-year-old and giving her the safety, structure, and emotional reassurance that she didn't get from the rest of her life. And not in a fluffy self-love Instagram affirmation sense, but in a real felt embodied sense, you are actually able to meet emotional needs that have never been met through your whole life. And something really powerful happens when you do this and you do it well, is that you start to be the parent that you always needed, and now you don't need the person you're dating to be that parent, and you can show up as a partner. Now, here's what's beautiful about this. When you start to step into this, you begin reinforcing your value. You begin reinforcing your worth. You begin reinforcing your gifts. You start to live in a state of connection to everything you bring to the table. Everything that makes you worthy of love and relationship and connection. And how this translates to your external relationships is really powerful because realistically, you might still want him to choose you. The difference is you don't need him to anymore. Your identity is no longer tied to whether you are chosen by him or not. And that's freedom. And so say that you date him for a while and maybe for any number of reasons it doesn't work out, and typically it has nothing to do with your worthiness. It's always about something else, but we make it about our worthiness, but it's always actually about something else. But when you're not chosen the way you want to be, you feel a little disappointment, a little depression of energy. You feel let down. Oh man, I really liked that person. I thought that would go somewhere. That's sad. I feel a little lonely. Again, that little depression of energy. But the deeper impression is, I know who I am. I know what I'm worth. I don't need him to parent my emotional child and validate my identity. And therefore, I'm actually okay. I'll grieve the loss for a little while, but I don't spiral into, oh my God, I'm not good enough and I never will be and I'm going to be alone forever because nobody's ever going to want me. I know that I'm wanted. I know that I'm worthy. I know who I am because I've been practicing reinforcing that to myself. And here's the thing. Yes, there's some letdown in the loss. There's some grief in the loss. But it says nothing about my larger identity or nothing about how desirable I am. And so I know I'll be chosen because who wouldn't want this? That's a different kind of frame. And see, most of us are going through life thinking that we want a partner to choose us. And what we really want is to finally just be chosen by ourselves. What we really want is not someone else's approval. What we really want is our own approval. We don't want someone else to say I'm good enough. We want to look in the mirror and feel good enough. And we've been chasing that approval from someone else because we just didn't know how to get it from ourselves. And this is why developing the shame resilience and the skill of reparenting ourselves is one of the most essential things. And here's the irony. When you don't need to be chosen, people are a lot more likely to choose you. And you know this. I mean, I'm sure whoever's listening right now, you've experienced this. You've had someone coming to you wanting you to choose them. And even if they were a perfectly good person, didn't the fact that they wanted you to choose them just make you want to choose them a little bit less? Of course it did. Because that is inherently unattractive. It's inherently unattractive when someone wants you to choose them because we are attracted to people who don't need to be chosen. And that's not shallow. That's not superficial. That's relational integrity because something in us can literally feel how draining it is to carry that much weight for someone else. That's not cold. That's not shallow. That is self-protection. And so, this is what I want to end with today. If the moment you meet someone that you really want, the kind of person you really want, the person you respect, you admire, that high value person, if the moment you meet that person, you feel small, you've got to name that. And before you try to get them to choose you, you've got to really figure out what it's going to take for you to choose yourself. Look, dating and partnering and the whole process is extremely emotionally intense. It's extremely volatile. You're going to go through a lot of ups and downs. But those ups and downs are very different when you're doing it with a stable inner world versus an unstable inner world. The first one is manageable. The second one is impossible. And I'm not saying you're going to transcend all grief and all disappointment and be perfectly happy a million days out of the year. I know that's not even a thing. But I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. I'm saying that it's going to be manageable, highly manageable. That you will be operating from a nervous system that knows how to handle stress, that knows how to respond to dysregulation, that knows how to relate with others without losing yourself in the relation. And you will create a safe space inside yourself that you can always return to feel your wholeness. And you won't be reaching outside of yourself for that. And I'm not going to say that you have to develop that to get into a relationship. We get into all kinds of relationships all the time. But I am going to say that is the foundation of a conscious relationship. And if you're listening to the Conscious Love Show, it's because that's what you're looking for. So sure, you can go out and you can find a relationship and it can be all different kinds of things. But if you want something that's conscious, something that's stable, something that's sustainable, something that can actually grow, something that can be uplifting and fulfilling and safe for a lifetime, this isn't optional. It's essential. This is the thing that you need to learn to develop. And when you learn to develop this, it will become the foundational context that shapes all your interactions. And I want to say this because there are a lot of people out there struggling in love right now. And we make it about, oh, there are no good men out there, and it's the dating apps, and it's this modern world, and it's this and it's that. And I'm not going to say that none of that's real. There are real challenges out there. I'm not pretending that they don't exist. But if more people learned what I'm describing in this episode, those challenges would suddenly not seem as big. You would have more access and more creative possibility. And suddenly you would see that all the reasons you've been telling yourself that it hasn't worked aren't actually the reasons. Doesn't mean you're going to fall into the lap of your ideal partner the next day. But you would feel a path forward that feels accessible, that feels real, that feels attainable. And you would start attracting new kinds of people. Or what might even happen is you might be attracting the same kinds of people, but all of a sudden they seem like new kinds of people because you're different, and now different things become possible in the relationship. A lot of times it's not the people. A lot of times it's how we participate with those people. And I want to close with this. On March 10th, I've opened up a few more spaces for people who want to join me in the Inspired Love program. We're inviting new people in starting on March 10th. And we're taking some calls right now for people who are interested to join us for that March 10th group. It's only a few spaces. We only accept 10 people, and we've already enrolled a handful of them. So if this is something that calls to you right now, if this is something that you know this needs to happen in 2026. Like, it's time. It's been long enough, and this is the time. I'm going to leave the link to book your call and to learn more about the program in the show notes. You can go to inspiredloveapproach.com or just click the link in the show notes and you can get started right there. But if this calls to you, if this speaks to you, if you feel this, if you know this is your next step, don't delay. This is where the magic happens. So I want to close with that. Thank you for being with me today. As always, wanted to make sure to drop in and share a message for this week. It's going to be, like I said, a little informal, but just want to drop it in anyway. And lots of love to all of you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Lots of love and blessings on your journey. I look forward to those of you who are going to be joining us for the March 10th group. Excited to see you there. And I'll see you then. So lots of love and blessings. I'll be back with you next week. Take care, everybody. Bye.